And if you feel, I mean, I don't know, if you feel more comfortable standing up, then you can probably get that mic to. You're happy to sit there?
Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I too would like to welcome you all here to the first Breakfast Club seminar of the day. I'd like to welcome you to Western Farm, and again I would like to thank the Stanbury family, who I feel a little bit guilty for dropping them into it back about 9 months ago, but thank you very much for your hospitality and your keenness on hosting the event. I'd also like to thank you very much for that. It was a real pleasure to come down off the moor this morning. For those who don't know me, I live on the top of Exmoor, and it was foggy as a bag up there when I left this morning, so it's really nice to come down where it's a little bit sunnier and a little bit drier and a little bit nicer air. But I hope you all have a very enjoyable and informative day. I'm sure we will see lots of things that we can take away to our own farms later on. Possibly shows the light for or the way forward for some of us to farm in the future and answer our critics over climate change. I'm really proud and honoured to be the National Chair of the NSA, something I've done for 18 months. And through that time, I've been given lots of interesting jobs and tasks to complete. But this is the first time that I've actually been asked to introduce a real live Baroness. Now, obviously, Minette doesn't need any introduction, because we all know her as the ex-NFU president for 6 years, and before that, vice president for 4 years before that. And some of us who've been around for a while would remember her as one of the 4 original ladies in beef back in the day. In 2024, she entered the House of Lords as a crossbench peer, as Lady Downton, or Baroness Downton, not Downton Abbey, just Downton, I believe. So perhaps Tenant Farmer, okay. But anyhow, she is here really because she's been tasked with a review into farm profitability, which she's carrying out, and this is part of her, I guess, information gathering here today. The other person who also needs no introduction, because he's already introduced himself, is Phil Stocker, our NSA CEO. And I think the format for this morning is Minette's going to give us a brief overview of what she's been tasked to do, what she's found out already, perhaps if she's allowed to digress that, and then Phil will answer and respond to that, and then we'll hopefully have time at the end for as many questions as we can take. So over to you, Minette.
Oh, well, thanks so much to you and Phil for the invite here today. And with a name like mine, you really do not need it. Look, it's a real responsibility and to a certain extent a judgment call as to whether I took on this profitability review. There were a lot of people that told me not to do it, but having accepted the invitation to go into the House of Lords, I suppose my interest is what it always has been, and that's how do we move the dial in the right direction for better farming and more profitable farming. So when I was asked to do it, to say no seemed completely wrong, because what am I doing in the House of Lords? And a House of Lords is interesting, but the dial hardly moves at all, quite honestly, in there. You can slow things down, and the House of Lords is quite good at doing that. But with a majority government, it's really, really difficult. And I mean, I found the same when I was at the NFU with the Johnson government. Labour have got a massive majority, so they can do what they want. So influencing from the inside is probably as good a chance as any. And if I'm honest, when I left the NFU, I still felt there was quite a lot of unfinished business, as it were. We left the European Union, we went into lockdown, and then we had the ongoing war in Ukraine, which meant the day job was pretty full on. So this is a chance to influence what that future would look like. You said, touch on things that have already sort of been influenced. I mean, I was very clear when I took the role on, and I do think it was a brave move of Steve Reed to let me into the department I think there were many that didn't want me in the department. But he did want me in there, and it is a brave move, and it does encourage a completely different conversation when you talk about farm profitability. For years, we have talked about efficiencies, we've talked about productivity, we've asked farmers in all sectors to do more and more and more and become more and more efficient. And so often that return hasn't gone back to the farm gate. And so this is a chance to say, actually, what does this mean for farming? And how do we deliver a greater level of the share back to farmers? When I came in, and you all know it, it's very heavily predicated towards the environment. So the last government was absolutely determined to deliver public monies for public goods, and the battle to get food in there was really, really difficult. I can remember in 2020 saying to the NFU we needed, and Phil and others were involved, we needed to write a white paper for what a sustainable farming scheme could actually look like, because there were no plans to have anything for farming. It was all about less farming and more for the environment. And we wrote that white paper, and George Eustace accepted it, and from that, the sustainable farming scheme was born. You all know, and I won't bore you with the story, but the determination of the last government to get the money out the door, they didn't get it all out the door fast enough. They ended up with an underspend, and we now live in a different world with a very challenged budget of which we need to deliver more from. So the first thing I wanted to do was to achieve a greater level of balance between food production and the environment. And if we take Natural England as an example, they have two sets of metrics. They have B&G metrics and they have environment metrics. And they are the owners effectively of the Nature Recovery Fund. So what I have suggested is that they've got to have sustainable food metrics that sit alongside those other metrics. Otherwise, the NRF budget is just going to go into nature reserves, protected landscapes, non-food producing areas. And for those of you that have looked at the land use strategy, I want to open the doors on the nature reserves and open all of this up. This budget has to spread everywhere over a farmed landscape. You know, you look at what this farm is delivering, a multifaceted return. And that's what we want to see everywhere. So there is permission now to look at what those metrics could look like for Natural England and others to achieve balance in their approach. There is permission now to look at how we measure our own food security. How do we maintain our own levels of self-sufficiency? So that, again, wasn't happening. But fundamentally, and no one knows this better than the sheep sector, you know, the market is absolutely king to profitability. And the approach that's been taken to date has very much focused, I think, you know, for the last government and this one, on public procurement. And that is a very, very, very small part of the market. And for the sheep sector, at £3.50 a day per person. So you can't buy very much lamb for £3.50 a day and buy everything else. It's a real challenge. So what I want to make sure, first and foremost, is that the ambition is about British raw ingredients. I had too many challenging conversations with Liam Fox, then, it's now DBT, what was then DIT, and he said the opportunity of Brexit is bring in cheap raw ingredients and add value to them under the Union Jack. And that was always a disastrous slogan. So I want full commitment from Labour that this will be about British raw ingredients. We've absolutely got to come together in a partnership structure with government. So that means many more farmers in the department like me, rather than outside. If I look at the New Zealanders, and I had a lot of conversations with New Zealand and Australia on the back of those two deals. When I was president of the NFU, George Brandis and Fiona Simpson together, we don't have any farmers going on our trade delegations. When the New Zealanders show up, they all turn up in their black fleeces with their silver fern, and you have the government, you have the levy tech people, and you have the farmers, and they sit down at every table and they say, These are the three things we want to talk to you about. So they're all joined up, the levy board, the co-ops, the farmers, and the government, because it's a huge part of the New Zealand economy. It's a huge part of the Australian economy. Farming is absentee. So one figure I want to bust completely is this 0.6% of value of GDP, which is what the Treasury will say that agriculture is. The endless conversations I had whereby others said, well, agriculture really doesn't matter very much because it's 0.6% of GDP. One thing I will get here today are the processes, the amount of investment that is here because the raw ingredients are grown here. And that's the game changer. And that is a multi-billion pound figure. Those businesses are just as they would rather be based in Poland than they would here. They're only here because the sheep have been produced here. That's why they're here. The same with the beef sector, the same with every other sector. That foreign investment is only here because the raw ingredients are either grown here or reared here. And because we've got 70 million people living on an island, this market is a really important market. So the fundamental rule of making sure this is about British raw ingredients is about 4 market opportunities. It is about retail, but 50% of the value of the food market is out-of-home food service. So we've got to be, and government needs to be, far more ambitious about how the out-of-home sector uses and accesses much more British ingredients. Then we come on to exports. Exports are absolutely vital in keeping that supply and demand market working. And so is the halal market. The halal market is growing and increasing, and that is the reason why your prices have remained broadly stable since we left the European Union. We overload that market at all. We go into an oversupply. We import too much. And don't you remember, the main criticism with Australia was that we gave away those safeguard measures. Not so vital in the sheep sector, but absolutely vital in the beef sector, that if there was a problem, Australia was sending us too many strip sirloins, too many prime cuts, not balancing their own carcass, we would upset our carcass balance and distort price. So it's really important that we join up the ambition retail, out of home, export and procurement. So I do want to see, and I will be recommending, a much more of a partnership board like New Zealand has, like Australia has, like the Borbia Food Board in Ireland. But I want to take it further than that, because I know I could write a review outside of government that you and I would all love. And I know it would sit on a shelf and it would gather dust and go nowhere. So I'm trying to write this review in light of working for farming profitability, delivering for government, delivering for taxpayers, and delivering for consumers. Now, the Secretary of State, alongside that, has 5 priorities that he put in place for the department. So they are water quality, flooding, nature recovery, food security, and the circular economy. So I don't just want to leave this as just about food production. When I was shearing my sheep, they had the Declining Oceans Conference that same weekend, and you will have heard Prince William talking about the absolute travesty of our declining oceans and the continual use of plastic and man-made products that is leading to this decline. We have, and absolutely have, to start changing our attitude to wool. I have sat and watched this now and lived it for all these years. The Secretary of State has put the circular economy in there as a priority for the department. So this is our chance to make that circular economy work for farming, because it sits at the heart, whether it is biorefineries that are making the packaging, which I've seen a fantastic tomato grower who is using the whole of the tomato plant to make the packaging, totally biodegradable, takes you out 100% sustainable, biodegradable packaging. But it's not. Why isn't it? Because the last Parliament, the biorefineries were all subject to the plastics tax. So despite the fact you had something that was completely biodegradable, in 2 months, it still came under the plastics tax banner. It is completely balmy. So I want to join this collaboration up with food, with fibre, and with fuel. You know, 1.4 billion litres of bioethanol coming in from the US is going to have impact on our arable sector. So we've got to look at other market outlets. So we maintain that level of profitability at individual farm level. Those 4 are all working and delivering for what we need. The other thing, when I went in there, I said the environment has got to be profitable. If farmers are going to be delivering for the environment, it's got to have profit margin built into it. It's not just going to happen. If they are going to take a percentage of their land out of production, then there's got to be profit margin in that. These are businesses. They are individual businesses. But we've got a depleting public purse. So how the private sector comes in and starts to pay for this has got to be defined. And it's legislated. This government have signed up to it. But I really am looking at models of how we deliver environmental benefit across a farmed landscape. There have been all sorts of green finance initiatives that have been put forward, but they don't have the scale. We have the scale within a farmed landscape. So if we structure it right, then we can have, I think, a profit from the environment basis. And there's plenty of examples. Poole Harbour is a really classic example of farmers being on the receiving end rather than putting farmers in as the solution. And I was in Norfolk last week and seeing how they have collaborated, how they have employed their own hydrologist at a catchment level, how they have been able to win a legal case by proving that actually water abstraction is not damaging the SSSI next door. So this is about putting farmers on the front foot. This is about putting farmers as a solution. I really want to be succinct in the recommendations. I could have 100 recommendations, and the dangers of doing that is that government says, right, well, we'll have those 20, and they will be the least 20 that you really want. So let's go for, as I've said in my letter to you, what are the 3 things or 4 things that are real blockages to farming profitability? And if we can unblock those, what are those solutions? So that's why I'm being really specific. So I'm trying to set up what I see as 4 structural changes, and then I need what would be the solution to those. I've got others that I would add to that. Competition law, I think, is enormously prohibitive. We can't talk price, and that's a major detriment, not so much to this sector, but it is to other sectors. So there's a lot of other levers that can be pulled in all of this. But it's the chance for the first time to look at farming profitability. Just one final thing. The SFI, I haven't been allowed any engagement on that. The stakeholder group, which includes the NFU, the CLA, the TFA, and others, stakeholder group is having that level of engagement on the SFI and what the SFI should be looking like going forwards. But have made it really clear that we've got to have an almost affordable food in any investment in how we're delivering on these legislated targets. So that's been what I've said to it, and I really hope that those working with others on what the SFI of the future looks like, I hope they're making progress. So I'm going to pause there, and I could talk, as you could tell, for a very long time. And Phil got me down here double quick. He said, I don't want to treat you like an old lady. I said, you feel free to treat me like an old lady if it gets me there a bit faster. So anyway, look, thanks so much. Look forward to your questions, and I hand back to your chairman.
Thank you, Minette. I think you're going to get the response from the sheep industry a little bit quicker than what you thought, because Phil will respond now on our behalf and
Let me
come,
run the notes.
come up with a few points.
What I think we want to do is get as much response as we can from the audience, but I would like to say a couple of things. First of all, I mean, personally, I think that this work, the profitability review is absolutely crucial, and it's being done at exactly the right time as well. When you think that we're going through consultations around the way we use our land through the land use framework, we're going through a whole strategy view around the farming roadmap, you know, the way that agriculture is going to adapt and change in the future, and the infrastructure that we need. We've got the food security review or the food strategy that's being worked on as well, and you know, alongside of that, all of that as well, we've got our existing climate change targets, we've got our existing nature targets, we've got targets for natural resources. Water is probably at the top of that agenda at the moment. You know, we've got targets for trees, there's targets for everything, but again, we're still lacking that target for profitability within food production. And yet at the core of all of those things, you know, whether it's nature or whether it's the protection of our natural resources, farmers usually sit right at the center of that. And if we want good outcomes, then there's probably no more cost-effective ways of delivering it than through action by farmers as well. I know farmers cost an awful lot less on the ground than employing armies of rangers and wardens to do this work. You know, so farmers are actually absolutely central to all this, and profitability is key as well. Now, you know, Minette, you know this already, but multifunctionality is absolutely central to the sheep industry. You know, whether it's the lowlands or the uplands, whether it's our integration within arable systems, or whether it's sheep farming on our permanent pastures in the lowlands, or in all of those upland areas where multifunctionality is. We don't even strive to do it. It's there. It's inherent with what we do. There's always more we can do, and there's always ways we can do things better. But if we are to achieve that optimum level of effective multifunctionality, then, as Minette says, it's got to be profitable, and all aspects have to be profitable as well. We can't have a situation where, or I don't believe we can anywhere, where diversification or the delivery of public goods subsidizes or upsets unprofitable enterprises on farm. We've got to be looking at ways where, you know, every aspect of this can be profitable, and that does take us into that area of SFI, and I suppose at the upper end of our agri-environment schemes as well, landscape recovery. I still think we're far too early to know just how landscape recovery is going to work. I think it's great now that we've got some landscape recovery bids that are being led by farmers, whereas, again, in those early days, they were all the environmental NGOs leading those. But, you know, farmers are taking a more leading role in some of those things, but it's still too early to see just how they're going to pan out. And as Minette said, you know, almost as the weeks and the months go by, the Treasury budgets seem to get tighter and stricter, and, you know, there's less money to go about. That takes you into that whole world of private finance and blended finance, you know, and how we make that work. And there's still no clear model that I see that gives farmers access to that private funding. Yeah. So anyway, just to summarise, I mean, I think the work that Minette is doing is absolutely essential, given that we've got all of this other strategic and policy work being developed. Profitability is actually central to that. So yeah, I'll leave it there actually, and I think we ought to open up to the audience.
Thank you, Phil. I see there's a roving mic going around by Julia a minute. Being chairman, I have the privilege of asking the first question to get the ball rolling. I was really pleased that you said you didn't want your report to gather dust. There has been several in the past, coincidentally some done by ex-NFU presidents, that do gather dust. How quick will you try and get your findings implemented into real practical solutions for the guys out here?
So they are really keen for me to be putting forward short-term recommendations now. And, you know, it doesn't all have to be targeted to government. It can be, I mean, I do think there is quite a serious conversation to be had with retail on integrity. You know, we have got quite a lot of Polish chicken coming onto our market with the Union Jack wrapped round it, and then in tiny print you've got produced in Poland, packed, of course, in the UK. So this whole British ingredients point and honesty at point of sale is really, really fundamental to the future, because at the moment it's dressed up. They know the consumer wants to be able to buy British. So if you put it with a Union Jack, the consumer thinks that it's buying. I've got quite a few frustrations around brand identity, and if James Dyson can't manage to sell Dyson strawberries in all retail, which he can't, it's only M&S currently, and one other retailer that has started stocking a few, but they won't sell under his brand. So we know fake farms are a huge success and selling point. We really, really should be making sure that we can create real farm brands that increase value back to the farm gate. And there are, New Zealand is so different. New Zealand is totally export focused. And this market here is one of the most prized food markets in the world. So what we're good at, we need to make sure that that's what we're selling. And for the poultry sector at the moment, you know, the bar was raised. We want slower growing birds. We want smaller stocking density. We want birds to have more space. So that has tightened the market, which has worked reasonably well on price. But then, of course, you're being undercut. And this is partly because the planning process is so burdensome. So if you want to put up a new shed right now, it's really, really challenging. So another thing that I'm saying is Whitehall has got to have an absolute mandate of planning for food. So you've got a blueprint at the top that comes out to all local planners, and this is the blueprint for how we put up a new building, rather than going through the burdensome process. Then you get pressure groups that all come in and bring the whole thing to a standstill. So there's a lot of things that could be done in the short term, and that is why I need the feedback. But there are things that I'm already saying, particularly on this British point, that they need to get behind and they need to start delivering on, and really calling others out on this.
Thank you, Minette. Ollie, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, hi Minette. Thanks for coming today. Really good to hear what you've said already. I was just wondering how you're treating farm diversifications in your review, because my feeling is that actually they're separate businesses and almost should be separated out, and that actually it can be a distraction to the core farming enterprises, and that actually we don't particularly want to get dragged into having diversifications because it doesn't suit every farm. So yeah, just wondering how you're treating that. And my second point is that from speaking to a lot of younger farmers, I wouldn't consider myself a young farmer anymore, tenancies is a massive problem within the industry, you know, particularly for expanding livestock businesses where you're trying to spread your fixed costs. A 3-year FBT where all the fences are knackered is absolutely useless, and it's really not uncommon. And actually, has there been any look at tenancies? And you know, since the old AHA tenancies have gone, FBTs probably haven't really functioned that well. And are you looking at that at all within your review?
Yeah, can I come back?
Yeah, far away.
Really good point. So I was asked at the very beginning, would I include diversification in farm profitability? And I was really clear that I shouldn't be looking at diversification, because there's no point in looking at farming profitability any more than you'd go to British Steel and say, well, can you try diversifying into house building? You know, you've got to look at where are those markets and how do you get a better return for them. And if you start doing a review that is how do you have a farm shop or whatever, that's a completely different thing. I mean, that's another review if they want to do one. So this is about farming and about how farming deals with the challenges that are now set in primary legislation. It's a really interesting point you make, though, and alongside your second point, when you say it should be taken out and treated differently. I sort of agree with it, but my landlord is thinking of doing exactly that, taking the diversification out and treating it differently. And that's, for me, a real worry, because I have looked at my business as a whole business. And the investment all goes, to your point on fences. You know, when I took on the farm, there wasn't a fence on it. And if we hadn't been running a catering business, we would have had to borrow a lot more money. So it was our other businesses that were being invested into the farming business that allowed us to grow quicker. So I'm quite concerned about taking them out. And I'm quite concerned about, with the loss of AHAs, more FBTs, what that all means. I mean, you know, the farmhouse, everything is, you know, if that starts being taken out and treated differently, then that's quite concerning, because that's a real game changer. And, you know, most farmhouses aren't remotely up to achieving a market rent that is viable, but it's the principle. And I mean, obviously there's the Rott review, and I saw Kate Rott yesterday, and she's very keen that I incorporate, you know, some of her recommendations into this, and I think I can wherever possible. The thing that the Prime Minister has kept on saying to me is, I want to do more for tenants. I want to do more for tenants. So I'd really encourage those that are tenant farmers to be looking at actually what it looks like. And because we've got so much diversity in the tenanted sector, you've still got I've still got some people on the estate that I farm on, 2 of them who are still on second generation AHAs. So we've got a lot of challenges out there because we don't have a one size fits all. So we really need to think in light of APR, BPR, all those things, and the danger of maybe if we do take a diversified business apart and split them, we just need some really serious thought on that.
I think my point was that it's always what we don't want is government pushing a whole approach where you've got a lifestyle business making no money and a diversified business making a lot of money, and then lumping them together and say, well, actually that business is profitable. It is, but should it be that way? I don't know.
It needs to be both.
It needs to be.
It does.
They should complement each other, not subsidise each other.
Yeah. I think part of our economy. And I always remember my first meeting with Tony Blair, and he looked up and he said, Minette, I never understood farming. I never understood it. I used to say to every other sector, what are the 3 things you want? And he said farming would always say, 3 things. We've got 20 things that we want, and then we've got another 20. And, you know, you look at the NFU's blueprint at the moment, there's 200 arse in there because obviously they're representing all sectors. So we are different, but, you know, the whole country is, you know, we are a farm landscape. So I'm trying to position this as is really exciting for government. This is part of your growth wealth agenda if you treat them as businesses.
Right, Ollie, you were a bit sneaky there and got in 2 questions. I will only want 1 question from the next questioner, and I would like a question, not a statement. So fire away, Brian.
One very long one. The first thing, I'm very reluctant to use the word profitable farming. I would prefer successful and sustainable because it's, I think it covers the subject better. There are many elements that make up a sustainable farm, such as environmental productivity, health and welfare, and so on. But within those elements, at the moment, the drivers are incredibly fragmented. We've got market forces, we've got legislation, we've got incentive schemes, we've got the likes of AHDB with best practice knowledge exchange, we've got Red Tractor sticking its hoof into it, and so on. So you mentioned board beer, and is there mileage in moving towards a more unified system where we get a combination of legislation, incentive schemes delivered through a trusted partner just to join up the dots? Does that make sense?
Brian is called than anything to date. So many people have said, oh, you shouldn't have called it that, you should have called it this. To be really clear, I did not call it the profitability review of farming. The Secretary of State called it that. So, look, I'd agree it could have been called all sorts of different things, but that is what he wanted to call it. So he's called it that, so he can get on with it. But the number of people I have to say who come up to me and say, well, you shouldn't have called it that, you should have started with a different name. So I would like to think that is absolutely the focus, successful and sustainable farming businesses. That is what we want to achieve. I think, Brian, we've got to get to, if you look at how independent nations that value agriculture, that see agriculture as part of their economy, if you look at how they are trading, and Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is a really interesting one because they are totally export focused. So if you get on a plane and fly to Belfast, you will be getting Irish shortbread and you will be getting Irish milk and you will pay for the privilege of getting it. If I get on a plane and fly to Scotland, I will get a Walker's shortbread that will be made with butter from Ireland, Durham wheat and sugar from England. It'll be wrapped in a little tartan wrapper and it will not have one single Scottish ingredient in it. And if you go to Heathrow or Gatwick and fly out of this country, you'll have Irish milk once again. So we haven't established a culture here of British, let alone English. You know, again, when I went to Balmoral Show, they've got Food Northern Ireland. One of my recommendations absolutely will be to establish Food England. Because if you look at the food partnerships, the Devon Food Partnership has been a really, really big success. They were all set up in those sort of early rounds of RDP funding when we had things like Tyrrell's Crisp that came out of it, because it was focused on a local agenda for local people, local processing, local jobs. And what have we seen? We've seen the loss of all of our small abattoirs because there is no national glue to hold it together. So I think there needs to be a different approach to England, and I think there needs to be an overarching approach that is collaborative across the UK, but we are really focused on all of those market opportunities. If we don't change, if we continue with the disparate nature we've got now, where you've got AHDB there, you've got the horticulture voluntary levy there, you've got poultry without any levy, so you've got all these different camps of agriculture at the moment that are not united. So we've got the situation with India and Scotch whisky. We've opened up India for apples. We've yet to get an apple out to India because we're not joined up. You know, if we're going to have more Scotch whisky, let's do it with British raw ingredients. Let's do it with British malting barley, rather than the huge amount of Turkish grain that's coming in at the moment. So that whole business around transparency, coordination, I don't believe that it was ever truly resolved when MAF became DEFRA, and DEFRA had the two sides, and Michael Gove said this in the very beginning, two sides of this department do not meet in the middle. Meet in the middle. And what does meeting in the middle look like? So if we don't have more farmers in there, it doesn't work. We've got a 5-year farming roadmap. What we've seen with IHT and these last-minute decisions that are made, we cannot go on a parliamentary cycle with these changes. Can you imagine every parliamentary cycle, we change everything, we rip it all up, we say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this. We can't do it to people. We can't do it to our farmers, to our supply chain, to people. We can't do it. So we've got to get on that roadmap. And I keep saying, I'm not going to organise an event. I'm organising a process that I really hope the whole industry will get behind, because if we get the process and the plan right, then it'll start to work.
Phil, would you like to
Well,
just
only
comment?
briefly, I was just going to say, I mean, you mentioned it, Minette, but that is the long-term nature of this that we need to take into a greater level of account, I guess. You know, we've got this dreadful habit of going around in circles, haven't we? I mean, it wasn't long ago that we had the English Food and Farming Partnership. It wasn't long ago that we had the regional development agencies.
Break them.
Absolutely, and you know, all that regional structure was in place at one time, and even our agri-environment schemes, they're the funding for a lot of our agri-environment. Learn, how on earth do we learn from what's been in the not too distant past?
Absolutely.
Lady over there has got a question, and if we could keep them short and punchy, we'll get more in. So,
Okay, yeah, Anne Wilcox. I suppose, Minette, I've always said that I had to curtsy, and now I really do have to curtsy.
You'll
when
be
I
in
see
trouble,
you.
Anne, if
I
you
know.
do.
It seems to me, having been involved with the co-design for the SFI, that when we discussed income foregone plus costs model, especially for the uplands, profitability is seen as a dirty word. It's seen as a dirty word with government, and it's seen as a dirty word in farming with Joe Public. When they see you driving your tractors, they just see that it's a big piece of machinery, a big cost, and that we shouldn't be making money. And I think that was an issue with the co-design model. But I think our greatest risk is actually government legislation will never happen because they can't find the hook. But I think we could end up in a situation where government legislate with something that we could have been paid for as a public good, but it becomes legislation, and then it's something we have to do without the opportunity of having a funding stream with it.
Can I come back?
you're far away.
I think you meant me short answers as well and more questions,
Well-
so I'll try. Look, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that is a real concern, that the incentives are not put in place to deliver the outcomes that are. I thought she's very interesting in how she's going to approach this. she and I were talking about Natural England and how they approach this, and they are just set up. I just don't see how it works if they've got these two metrics. This is why I want these sustainable food metrics, so that it all is balanced. Because if you only set yourself up with this binary approach to deliver one outcome, I mean, there's huge cost to delivering BNG and environmental nature benefit. And so you need more and better farming to be able to do that. If you get that bit right, then the other bit is the outcome. But if you don't focus on that bit, you cannot legislate, as I see, to achieve that, because land abandonment is not the same thing. You know, and in your new job now, Phil, you know, we've got it wrong so many times as to what this should look like. And what I'd really encourage is that the uplands are really clear in what, and I know that's difficult because I know it's a very diverse landscape, but we need to be really clear in what good looks like. You know, you've been left last on the list for a long, long time. I mean, I don't have the access to that, but I can have access to the metrics for what this should look like and the baselining. And, you know, I think that's really important, because if we can't measure it, we can't value it.
Just to add to that as well, you know, it's becoming clearer to me that, you know, if we are trying to achieve those sort of objectives on those really sensitive landscapes that we're looking for, they need particular approaches, and they need particular approaches to land management, also to farming. And for those very sensitive traditional farming approaches or systems, I guess, to then compete against others in the lowlands that can farm in a more intensive way, I suppose, is really, really difficult. So again, there is the need for them to be supported. There's no doubt about that. It was a real frustration for me when the SFI uplands came out and they started to talk about a shepherding payment. I thought, wow, that sounds really good. There's going to be some recognition for that, for the amount of time that's needed more intensely shepherding our stock in the uplands. But actually, it was all about just removing stock. It was about taking them off, housing them, or putting them away on tack. And what we want is people up in the uplands on those moorlands actually more actively managing their stock.
Yeah.
I saw Eric's hand go up.
Should be addressing Baroness, not Mr. Chairman. Our government is strapped for cash. I don't think it's any secret. Now, there's also the saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Now, the cynic in me would suggest that maybe they're charging you, giving you the orders to come up with a rosy picture of agriculture, so they can cut back on the farming element in the DEFRA budget. But you'll tell me that's not the case. But on profitability, you did not say anything on the focus you've been given. Alone, there are many variables in. For example, on one hand, you got a percentage that will have a short-term boost from these SFI payments. But then on the other extreme, you've got ones who've been unfortunate enough to become badly hit by the modern diseases of the day, you know, blue tongue, Schmallenberg, and the like. And there is a man-made one coming straight down the road at us. Scotland has had 20 years experience of it already in the west coast, and it's spread well into Perth and Kinross. And that's 20 years experience, and yet we never learn. It appears there's another dimension coming, one only probably 25 miles from here as the crow flies. But I'm interested to know what criteria you've been given, because there are so many variables across all sectors.
Yeah, so, I mean, the criteria I was given, you can see my terms of reference. They are published online. A lot of people will say, you know, focus on small things. And there are some small things that can be done. But if you lift up one rock, you pretty soon find that if you don't lift up all the rocks, then actually none of it works. So we've been members of the European Union since 1973. We are structured still in all government departments, actually, to be members of the European Union. We are not members of the European Union. We're now an independent nation, slightly challenging because we are 4 countries, not 1. And one of those countries is still part of what we were part of. So what it looks like as an independent trading nation. So it is an independent review, and it will be their choice as a government as to what they accept or what they don't accept, which is why I'm trying to do it, bringing in those 5 priorities that they've set for the department, because then it stands far greater chance of getting over the line. But it is an independent review. So I have been able to shape that review. I've taken out diversification because I'm farming. And as you've said, and the AHTB figures show, you know, the sheep sector, along with most sectors, you know, has diversity and profitability. You know, you have got your top 20% of sheep farmers, you've got the lion's share in the middle, and then you have got some that are in the lowest percentage. I do think there's a job to be done as to how do we help the mid-tier step up. You know, do people want a better business? Yeah, we all want a better business. We all want to learn from each other. But how that is done and delivered, I don't think is working either. You know, when you look at the huge amount of advice, you look at agritech as an example. Agritech has just been made part of the industrial strategy. Is it goal-orientated to what we need to achieve on the ground? No, it's not, because it's got no way of speaking to farmers. So we've got to develop a different system that, you know, really does work together. We've got to be collaborating much more, because if you take BPS out, you know, you're going to have to collaborate much more. What are the mechanisms for doing that? You know, so you do need, I think, to look at structural change as well as short-term measures that can be put in place. So I have been allowed a fairly, you know, broad approach to what this looks like. But that's why I'm writing to everyone, to get their input. This is me convening this, not writing it all myself. And that's a really important point to
Just
make.
very briefly, I mean, we are talking about UK, aren't we? We're talking about 4 nations.
This is a difficult point.
Exactly.
This is a difficult point, Phil, because this review is farming profitability in England.
Yeah. And
But there
absolutely.
are some things, disease, you know, disease, we have got to look at it as a UK-wide approach. You know, we've got foot and mouth that is rife in Germany. You know, we are a major threat of
And
disease.
we're a UK-wide organisation, the National Sheep Association. We've got members right across the whole of the UK, and we long make the case quite openly that our levy bodies should be collaborating much more closely. I think we are starting to make some progress there, but there's still a lot that we could gain through our 4 levy bodies working more closely together.
The Scots said to me the other day, when I was talking about this model of bringing it all together, they said, how do we invest in that? I said, you and Scotland suggest it, and England will be delighted to receive
absolutely.
it. But if England suggests it, Scotland will say. So I hope, you know, if
And just for clarity, Eric, I guess you were talking about the Scottish problems as white-tailed sea eagles. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. You're a bit like Basil Fawlty, not mentioning the word war. You didn't actually say the eagles.
Minette, you mentioned wool as well, and again, something else that has often come up in our conversations is the fact that we have our levy bodies going overseas on trade missions and all sorts, and then 3 weeks later, British Wool goes over and does the same thing. Yeah. And our levy bodies, you know, look after us as an industry. Why on earth can't there be more collaboration between the two?
I've got time for one last question, if I may. And the gentleman at the back there with the yes.
Neil.
Yeah, Neil.
Just
With
following
that.
on a bit from what Anne has said and what you're talking about here, I'm involved in conservation projects. You want to make us economical. You're making us reduce livestock all over the country, but we're realising on the project we're involved with, the environmental goods that are being damaged aren't necessarily from farming with livestock. It's from predation being created by the human population in general. Now, we're being told to get rid of our livestock out the hills. So that means getting rid of the staff, getting rid of the youngsters, getting rid of the contractors, and our wildlife is still declining. Now, we're shooting thousands of foxes, badgers, there's crows in our areas and everything else, being told our cattle and sheep are detrimental to wildlife, so we're getting rid of those, and then we're importing food from countries that are burning the rainforest to feed our population, when it's the population in general that are helping to damage our wildlife. Why are they not addressing this more as a country, or is it just because they have a distaste of the fact that we've got to control the vermin species for wildlife benefits, and actually our livestock are beneficial to the wildlife that are out there in certain numbers and cases? I know we need change for a better food production country with nature goods, because your two priorities are nature goods and food security. We can do that, but the government's got to be realistic about the population creating vermin species that has got to be controlled. So how do you think we can, Phil knows all about this through the land use management group, how do we go on that?
I think you'd be better off saying, Neil, to start with, you know somebody who does all those things, because we don't really want to say that in public. So, but anyway, over to you in a minute.
Well, look, firstly, it is absolutely not me. So government decides, what the policy is going to be. Natural England decides what the policy is going to be. I only ever got involved in the NFU because I was so infuriated with Natural England and the Environment Agency. That was how I got to my first ever meeting. So it's not me. I'm trying to resolve it, and I'm trying to develop a better partnership and a better understanding, because that is fundamentally where it's going wrong and where it's always been going wrong. And, I was part of the SFI. We planted herbal ley at the end of April, when we'd had some rain. It germinated reasonably well. We then haven't had any rain since. 3/4 of the field has sort of germinated. The quarter hasn't. The jackdaws and the crows have dug the rest of it up, and they've caused absolute blooming carnage out there. The whole thing has cost me about 8,500 for 28 acres. And the crows have done an enormous amount of damage. So, we're all suffering from it. It is, a huge level of madness. But we've got to bring that level of understanding back together and be clear on the outcome that we're trying to achieve.
But there's a public dislike for controlling vermin. Until that happens, we won't be able to help.
I don't think it's a public dislike. There are some that really, you look at the planning situation. There is a level out there that would be delighted if we didn't produce any food at all. And that is what we're up against. So I don't think the public, I think we've got to be really careful about this, because I think the public are predominantly really on side, but they're silent. That's the point. So you've got this vociferous minority that would like to offshore all of our production, and have a wilderness as per the George Monbiot approach. So that's the challenge, and that's what we have to resolve.
So do you think the government would support a foxes, badgers, everything annihilating our ground nesting birds that are being fed by the general public? How do we control those numbers?
So I had to go up to Swaledale recently with Daniel Zeitner, the farming minister, to look at this exact situation on a grouse moor up there. So we were able to see, I have never been up so close to a curlew. You can see all the curlew, all the chicks, all the lapwing, everything that they have done, because it is a highly managed landscape. So he's been there, he's seen it, he thought it was remarkable. If we don't control predators, then our ground nesting birds and everything else will be destroyed. So that's the way to do it, to get these people out, to let them actually see it for themselves.
Right.
We'll have a chat.
Hang on a minute, Neil. I've got to draw this to a close, I'm afraid, because time's going on. So you're more than welcome to carry on this conversation later on in the day. I guess you were around till...
I've got to go to Stratford after this, which is a pain. But anyway, I will be here for another hour and a half at least.
So please do. Minette's very approachable. Thank you very much for coming down and speaking to us today. We've really appreciated that. Thanks, Phil. And I declare the rest of this closed and show your appreciation in the usual way.